So welcome to the Diary of a CTO podcast. My guest today is Mike Kennedy, Chief Technology Officer at K2 Corporate Mobility. Mike, how you doing?
I am doing well. Thank you for the opportunity, Guy.
No worries at all. Lovely to have you. Lovely to have you. So, Mike, you have circa 20 years experience leading large-scale technology transformation and building global teams across industries. Some highlights include launching Goldman Sachs Warsaw office through to co-founding a tech startup. So lots to discuss today, and very much looking forward to hearing a little bit more about your journey. So yeah, let's start at the beginning, as I always like to do. Talk us through a bit about how you got into tech in the first place and your career journey through to where you are today as CTO of K2, if you would be so kind.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you, Guy. So it's quite a lot to cover because it is over 20 years now. And the career has covered large corporate to startup to SME scale up. So
whole range, the whole shebang.
Kind of feel as though I've had a bite at a few apples, and they've all been good. And for me, it's all been about timing. I started though at the bottom. I started as a programmer. I'm not sure that's ever the bottom. I don't want any programmers listening to this to think it is.
We know what you mean.
But I started learning to code. And I went from PL1 to COBOL to C to C++. I was using Sybase SQL when that was fairly new, and nice. Unix to Linux servers, both the back end and front end. So I really learnt the grassroots of where I built my career from. Mm-hmm. And that I think has been one of my strengths, mm-hmm. because it's not just theories, it's having had hand on keyboard.
So how important do you think it is, sorry to just cut across there, because I think that's a really interesting point, because you see, and why I love doing this podcast, because you see lots of people arrive into the CTO position from all different walks of life. But I guess, the hands-on developer, engineer is what I'd maybe call more the classical route. But how important do you feel it is as a CTO today to have had that background as a hands-on engineer in the early stages of your career?
For me, it's key because of how I interact with my teams, how I understand what I'm asking them to do, and how realistic or not that is. I'm always working under sort of pressurized deadlines, and therefore it's easy to bend to the will of the business, but you need to understand what you're asking your teams to do because they have to follow you into the next project and the next project. But that's my style, sort of drilling down, as it were. You have a number of very successful CTOs who might have come from more of a consulting background, who come just with a completely different vision and style, but then they build their teams differently, and they have their key technology sort of lead who they're able to work with. And I am a big believer that it's the team you build around you. You cannot know everything. You cannot do everything. And it's the composite of that team that makes you all successful.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's horses of courses, I guess, isn't it? There's certain companies where maybe that approach is better, and others where obviously it isn't. But no, very interesting. So sorry, I cut across you there. But so continue.
So I spent most of my, I would say, career character building at a large corporate, and it was an investment bank. I was sitting on the trading floors, getting shouted at because everyone else was under a lot of stress, but you were very much part of that business team. And I think that has developed my technology character a lot. I like working very closely with the businesses. I like understanding their goals, what the business goal is, rather than just a request for a solution, and therefore partner with them. Especially now, everyone feels they know technology now. Everyone's a technologist, and they come to you and ask for a solution. And you do have to drill down to a certain level of detail in order to build the confidence that tell me your problem and we'll work out the solution together. During that time as well, I worked in 5 countries. I moved around a lot. So that also gave me a great perspective of, I wouldn't say different technologies because you get that through any long career, but I was able to really learn different cultures through living in different countries. And so now when I work with global teams, which is part of all of our lives now, global teams, it's not just the skill set that you're interacting with, it's also people who get up in the morning and go home to a different environment, a different culture. And that does change how you adjust your approach to a degree. I never want to lose that personal side, even though my driver is getting the technology skills and technology solutions onto the table, into the cloud.
Yeah. Fair enough. I think it's another great point around leadership today and how I guess a lot of CTOs in some way, shape and form, most businesses now do have some kind of international footprint, whether it's presence somewhere else or maybe a nearshore team or even an offshore team. So do you feel the ability to have spent time in those countries physically has enabled you to be a much more effective leader in a remote setting?
I do think that. But it also helps you be a much better leader when you're managing those teams. Quite often people will get a remote team because it's a better cost point. And they're the other side of the world, and you're sending them emails and having Teams calls, and you're saying, get this done. But you're not embedded in that team. You're not bringing your network into that team. You're not giving your experience to that team over a coffee or a drink after work or something. And that makes a significant difference. And then people talk about a team failing or a country not being so good. And a lot of it is because the people aren't vesting in that team. They're just expecting. Yeah,
absolutely. And we obviously spoke about this, I know, from a previous conversation, but you've literally, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the introduction, been responsible for starting an office kind of ground up for Goldman Sachs in Warsaw, which obviously is no mean feat and a pretty tricky endeavor. So how did you talk us through a little bit about that, and what was your approach and some of the challenges that you encountered setting up an international office from ground up?
Well, actually, I'll take a step back from there, because the reason I got that job within the same company, but the reason I got it is because I moved to India, Bangalore in India, to manage a team there. We were we were insourcing from a large technology company over there back into the company, but into our India office.
Right.
And so I moved there, as I said, to sit with the team and be
cool.
part of that process, not just telling other people to be successful, but to be very, very, very much part of that team. And because of that, I had suddenly moved away from my previous experiences of being on trading floor, being with the business, to being in a remote office myself. And I could see some of those challenges. Now, luckily, I had the connections, the understanding, the experience to be able to sort of close that gap for that team. But without being there, I wouldn't probably have appreciated enough. So therefore, when that sort of gig was done, that was 2.5 years, not too long, the company was looking at nearshore for Europe. Because the India office had been so successful, it was the second largest office in the world for the company at the time, which was uncomfortable for the company just because of location risk, etc. And so we then were looking across Europe, and I put my hand up. But because I had this experience of building up the remote team, I was a more logical choice for the nearshore team. And I moved there, and there was literally that time no office, no one on the ground, and I really had to learn and understand not just the talent pool, but the local labor codes, and just how to get that started and recruit. And that was, I would say, one of the most fun experiences, because even though I was in technology because I liked building things, as opposed to auditing what someone else was doing or advising. I like to sort of see the product, and this was the same thing, but from a different angle. Sure. I was building a team in an office and selling that as much internally to the company as far as a good place to put your projects, as externally to get the best people in that area into my team.
Yeah, nice. And I didn't realize actually you moved over to India when you had that role. That's really interesting to understand. But I guess, like you said, it's come with a precedent and a badge of honor to say I've already done it once, and I'm the right guy to do it again, I suppose, which is always a nice place to be. What were some of the challenges that you encountered? Because I think you're probably being very, very humble there. I wasn't too sure what adjective was going to come out of your mouth, and you said it was very fun. But I'm sure it was very fun. But what were some of the challenges that you maybe encountered in that journey that you hadn't necessarily thought about when you probably put your hand up for the job?
Yeah, the amount I would have to learn HR, I think, rather than technology.
Yeah.
But also, it's very fast moving market. Like I'd come from Bangalore in India, where sometimes people wouldn't even turn up on the first day because they'd been offered another job, right? There were jobs all the time. And therefore you were constantly hiring and recruiting, and you had to focus on building a culture in the team where people wanted to stay. And probably what surprised me more is when I moved to, but we had an established office. When I moved to Warsaw in Poland, we weren't really known. Right? It was a well-known investment bank throughout the world, but not in the Warsaw technology market. They wanted to work for Google. They wanted to work for Apple. They didn't want to work for an American investment bank. And so I found myself having to do a bit of legwork, joining meetups, etc., and again, push myself out of my comfort zone to try and attract the right people in, find the best universities to go present at, etc. And then starting with hiring the best sort of tech leaders, build a team around them. But retention was and still is always a challenge in technology.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, so much of what you said there resonates. And as a technology leader and as a CTO, it's interesting how many of those challenges you were describing aren't related to the tech. It's about the people, the environment, but it's such a great point, right? And I guess it's a fantastic experience to add further strings to your bow as a technology leader.
Well, back to the tech. The tech wasn't a problem because of the skill sets coming out of the universities in Eastern Europe, and still are, phenomenal. As you know, I've got a team in Bucharest, Romania now, but obviously I've got a number of friends still and contacts in Poland, right, in technology, and the quality is phenomenal. And I think it's because a lot of those universities aren't turning out graduates into marketing and some of the more glamorous industries now. Maybe the front office investment banking or etc. A lot of people are leaving to be lawyers, accountants, and a very large number technologists. So you know the skills there. That was easy. And very quickly, from a technical perspective, we were running global projects and had global technical leads out of this small Poland office.
It's really interesting to hear that the biggest, the talent is there, but I guess, like you say, it's the biggest challenge, I suppose, is, it sounds ironic, doesn't it, for a company like Goldman Sachs, but the actual branding piece and getting on people's radar, and I guess the proposition, right, and telling the story about why somebody would want to come and work there. And again, that's obviously a great skill for a leader to have. But you've clearly...
My competitor was Google. Not a bad place to be.
I was going to say, yeah, you've got to really be in your A game, right, and sharpen your claws to make that happen. But you've obviously done this multiple times now. You've gone into an international country. Obviously, you just spoke about how you've got a partner now in Bucharest, and I totally agree with you in that sort of scenario. The culture of what you're building is so important, not only from an attraction point of view, but from a retention point of view, as you mentioned there as well. So just keen to understand a little bit about your view as a leader. How do you approach fostering a successful, quote unquote culture within teams that allows retention and allows scale? Are there any kind of universal traits or approaches that you take, irrespective of the country or the scenario?
Resilience leaps to mind. Maybe that's the same everywhere. I think in technology, you have to keep learning. That's what everyone says. That's obvious. That keeps you humble because you don't know everything. As we were saying before, you build the right team around you. It's a very fast changing environment. I mean, as we're seeing now, right, with all the AI solutions, as we've seen over the last number of years with cloud technologies allowing startups to come to market at a much cheaper cost point. It's changing so fast. There is sometimes I think if I just sit back, the technology solutions will come to me, and quite often they do. But I think you need to learn and try and be leading edge if you can, and that helps a team. The people in technology want that culture as well. But part of that learning is then understanding where the risks are. So I need to be clear on cybersecurity, for example. Everyone's concerned about that now. But in my current role, where we move people around the world and we have data on their addresses, their families, their pet names, all this useful information, but also it's just because not just because of GDPR. It's like there's a real responsibility to holding that data, and therefore, from the first instance of design to development to implementation, we need to keep sort of cybersecurity these days as absolutely core. So setting those almost like principles or tenets are very important. Another thing would be the team understanding that I support extending a project to address technical debt. That's actually very important for a team. If you want to be proud of your code, but you're layering on new enhancement, but then not going back to change some of the underlying libraries as they become out of date, or even just refactoring your code because the goalposts have moved in a moving industry. I think that becomes quite important. So with those cultural principles, we got a framework or a foundation, and then it is about, I go back to not knowing everything, supporting the team because the team is supporting me. It is important that I listen as much as tell. I learn from my team a lot, and there's no one right way to solve a problem. And therefore, like we sit down and we talk about the different approaches we can take. Step back, think about our bigger systems environment and technologies we're using, and ISO 27001 audits or SOC 2 Type 2 compliance that we have to have, etc. But the team have a voice in that, so they're part of that. That's just final solution.
Nice. And interesting to hear you talk about some of the things that you have to keep front and center as a CTO, which you absolutely do. Which obviously is the cybersecurity piece of building everything to be secure first, and then the other interesting part like there was the going back and addressing legacy tech debt, and again I think that's a skill of because let's face it, they're not necessarily always the sexiest parts of the job or the projects that you're going to ask people to do, but it is that element of creating the right culture, I suppose, of, I think you said pride, of people that are proud of what they're building and the level of ownership. And I think the teams that do that successfully, have the leaders that are able to instill the importance of why those things need to happen, right? And help people be proud of maybe doing some of the work that's not necessarily the most fun and enjoyable, but certainly necessary.
Well, to that point, so those items I mentioned are very defensive. What I didn't mention, which is just as important and has to be balanced out, is the offensive. And these days, for example, it's the AI approach. Where can you use AI? GitHub Copilot is great, encouraging use, responsible use, etc., and still having people manually review is step one. But then having getting the team to be brave enough to embrace AI solutions, within a process flow. They don't have to build everything from scratch, but therefore to take credit for the success of those components. Understanding where you should implement SaaS solutions, because you don't have to build everything from scratch, because then you can get, a very high quality solution and a fuller functional system with a better time to market. And that's the offensive side. It's not just about sitting in the office or at home and coding a solution to a spec. It is taking ownership and credit for that bigger picture. And I think that helps drive creativity.
Absolutely. It's the balancing act, isn't it, between, I like the way you describe that, defensive and offensive. Absolutely. And I guess that is probably quite a nice segue into talking a little bit about your career post Goldman. So you co-founded an organization around kind of AI driven talent analytics, I believe. So talk us through a bit about that journey, right? I guess starting your own business, how did you find it? How did you approach it? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that was a great opportunity. In fact, when I finally made the decision to move on from Goldman Sachs technology, which was a hard choice, right? I had an absolutely great journey there. I did want to try something completely opposite, the startup world. And I actually first focused on cryptocurrency.
Oh, right.
There was the leader at the time of the Polish blockchain accelerator, Professor Krzysztof Piek, very, very intelligent guy. I met him and we were looking at how we would implement a stable coin. And it was just the wrong timing. As ever with startups, timing is as important as...
Tell me about it.
Let's see. And it was... I learned a lot from scratch there about just having to pivot, knowing when to pivot and when to focus and drive forward. We didn't actually get to incorporate, but that was my first jump into that world, meeting with the Bank of England and global press coverage, but it didn't come to anything. But that was where I got a real taste for, I like the startup world.
Yeah. And
then through contacts I had made as running the Poland office for the bank, we then got together and did a talent delivery startup. That, however, wasn't like TopTal delivering individuals with skills. It was delivering teams. So it was connecting small-sized software houses, which there's a lot in Eastern Europe, with global clients.
Okay.
And we got European funding. We kicked it off. I was 3 years doing that. And that's when I realized that I might not, when I talk about resilience, have the resilience to be in the startup world versus the corporate world. It was absolutely fantastic ride, but the pivoting and changing from what was an initial objective, which was probably required, was a bit bit tricky. It wasn't just about building the technology to support this business. It was about building the business. And still going today. It was great. A huge respect for my fellow co-founders. But I then moved from there to a small SME, a medium-sized company on a scale-up route. And I think that was a good place to land. I kind of feel I rounded out my experiences.
That's it. It kind of feels like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears when you were telling that story of, you tried the corporate world, you tried the startup world, and now you're completing the trio into the scale up world. So let's talk a little bit about that then. So your current role at K2, tell us a little bit about what you're doing day to day, and then I guess keen to pick your brains a little bit on the AI piece that you mentioned, about, I guess the offensive bit of, how are you implementing that in your day to day, and any kind of interesting use cases you have to discuss. But yeah, tell us a little bit about the business.
Well, I'm CTO, so responsible for the technology, but we're not a technology driven firm. The technology supports the services that we provide, and I think that's key. The personal contact within a relocation company is really important these days. It's far too easy to hide behind an app, and we don't want to do that. But to drive efficiency, and these days everyone has apps on their phone. Everything's an app. You need to drive forward in this space, but at the same time, you don't want notifications for every app on your phone about what you're meant to do today. So it's getting that balance. It's finding solutions that are going to add value to those involved, and drive the efficiencies so people are using their time most effectively.
Yeah. Now,
of course, because of the startup world, there are many solutions out there. So you don't have to build everything yourself these days. But you do need to understand what's best in class. And therefore, we have some integrations with some best in class solutions. And they might use AI or, let's say, embedded Google Maps and various other functions, and we're able to feed sort of the base data over, and they take that forward and have a whiz-bang front end that took years to develop, and we just jump in as their client, and other things we will develop from scratch ourselves.
Interesting. There's a very pragmatic approach that you take, and I totally agree. I think in this day and age, like I say, there's the certain things that you can spin up very quickly, thankfully, and get a product from 0 to 1 into the market, but in the same breath also recognizing, should you do that for absolutely everything, and obviously there's other kind of more mature, I suppose, and sophisticated tools that you can piggyback off, which ultimately create a more robust kind of coherent service to your customers as a result. But talk for those people that haven't necessarily come across K2 Corporate Mobility, just talk through a little bit about actually the services you provide, and obviously what you do kind of day to day, just to give people a bit of context.
Well, as a company, it's relocation business, but it's working very much with our clients' HR companies. So in some ways, it feels from the individual's perspective, it may be sort of in the background unless we're moving them. But it is a top tier moving company. Quality is everything. That's why I talk about supporting the services. It's not a race for the bottom on moving people as cheaply as possible.
Of course,
it's about keeping the absolute top quality experience. And that is internationally. So of course, as I said before, I lived in 5 countries, so I've moved around with my career. And I had that perspective. And in fact, it was K2 who moved me from Poland back to London. And it's going to sound a bit like an advert, but it was the best experience because of that culture of making sure it's personal.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I can really get behind businesses that I'm not overly driven about volume, and the quality of service to me is everything. And I guess really, like you said, you're helping people make a huge decision, aren't you? A huge part of their life. And I think if you can really support people through that and offer an excellent service in the same way that I feel, without again turning it into a True North advert, I feel, I always say you've got three big decisions in life. You've got who you love, the house you buy, and the job you do, right? They're three huge things. And fundamentally, you can really consult and help people through making one of those huge decisions, which in fairness can actually sometimes evoke one of the other ones, not maybe who you love, but the house move possibly is another one. So yeah, the mobility piece I think is really interesting, and great to hear that you guys sort of pride yourselves on the service.
Well, it's the most important thing in someone and their family's life. That's the most important project they have going on.
Absolutely.
When that happens, and they're usually doing two jobs when they move, their old job and their new job. So when you talk about new solutions, I think AI is a great one. You do want to use it. You do want to look for the right use cases to use it. But that might not be a chatbot. Unless you know that chatbot is the most efficient way of getting FAQs out the way, but it's not something that's trying to create a buffer between them and the person who's actually moving them. Now, things like OCR of, let's say, receipts, etc., and processing that, I think that's a solution that drives an efficiency. Then everyone doesn't have to type things in. You've got, let's say, internal in a company, you've got all these AI productivity tools now. But then when you use AI, you need to make sure, back to the cybersecurity, that you're understanding the data you're pumping into it. Because with the large language models, that's SaaS, and so you've got to be sure that that's not leaking. And so your choice of AI becomes important. Now, these days, you've got Microsoft Copilot and now actually ChatGPT within Azure, and there are a number of other solutions. You can sandbox or ring fence access to your data, so it's safe, and you have the AI access to your data, which is good. And there's more and more research in machine learning with smaller data sets, which is going to be extremely valuable. So it's good to be on that bandwagon. But DOP becomes really important, because if people are just tapping in sensitive information about, let's say, clients or people, you don't want that leaking out.
Yeah, of course.
We actually have within contracts now a number of clients who are coming back and saying, actually, we don't want you just using AI with our data.
You're right. Okay.
Without us knowing how. And this comes to from a push to how are you using AI, how are you driving efficiencies? It's becoming, how are you protecting our data? And that's got to be a constant watch item. No, AI is the way to go. I mean, we throw out AI, it's kind of all-encompassing, right? It is, it is in all of our future. It will join the dots on what a lot of us do, I believe. It will give us much better trend analysis. And when we look at our data and then connect that with the macroeconomic data, let's take moves, for example. If we see a trend in our stats, it would be interesting to see how it's tied to wars around the world or other aspects that are happening. You can't necessarily predict wars around the world, but you can broaden that analysis very effectively. With AI.
Really interesting, some of the use cases that you talk about within that, and just listening to you talk there, it kind of struck me that there's obviously, clearly you're saying there's a lot of efficiencies that can be driven and a lot of benefits to using it in the right way, but it kind of feels like a really interesting juxtaposition almost between the use of AI and driving efficiency, but then also maintaining the quality of service at the same time. I think you used chatbot as a great example in the first instance. I think we've all been in that situation where you can probably recognize the value that the chatbot can have from an internal, cost resource time point of view, freeing a lot of resource up. But in the same breath, we've all had experiences with chatbots where you want to put your fist through the screen within about 5 minutes as well, right? And obviously it's about maintaining the level of service at the same time. So do you feel there's any elements within the business at the moment where there's a use case where you can sort of almost see a direct correlation between the use of AI, and obviously I totally take your point about data protection into account as well, because that's becoming increasingly important, absolutely. But the use of AI and having a direct correlation to an improved quality of service in the same measure, is there anything that sort of springs to mind there where you're actually like, do you know what, this has been able to maintain the quality and the integrity of the services that we provide, but actually also kind of revolutionize things from an efficiency and organization point of view?
I would say we're treading carefully. When it comes about efficiency, people talk about AI, and a lot of the time they mean RPA, robotic process automation, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you get a known input with a known output, right? AI is known input, unknown output. And therefore you've got to make sure you understand the parameters of what's going to come out. And I'm not being negative. I'm just saying it's about understanding that. I think efficiency has been driven up by RPA for a long time now, where bots have been joining up systems, and then you later follow up and do the coding to join those systems. As far as places where it is useful, right? Let's take those productivity tools, without doubt, right? And that is, for example, how people are using Microsoft Office, Microsoft 365 these days, with a Microsoft Copilot license that locks down how your data is being managed and the risk of leakage. Suddenly, just the efficiency and help it can bring to things like Teams calls seems trivial. You go back a few years, it wouldn't have seemed trivial, but now these days it's one of those standard approaches. So I think it's engaging those known solutions helps. You look at, let's say, a system like Velocity. That is an excellent external-facing system for people who are moving. We use it as an add-on for some clients who want to use it, and therefore it will give them, their places on maps where schools are compared to where they might want to live based on the information they have. It has an avatar that speaks hundreds of languages or a large number of languages, and I think that is a great example of where the investment comes back and helps an experience.
Yes, yeah, fair enough, and yeah, it's great to hear, and I suppose, like you said, it's that's a great example of something that's increasing efficiency, but is not necessarily looking to immediately replicate human interaction, which I think is a very valid point. And I think that's where we sort of start entering into tricky territory when it comes around customer service, of the ability for AI at the moment to replicate what it is to actually be human in the way that humans like to interact with each other. But no, I think this is a great example.
But if you are looking to reduce the team size, if you are looking, let's say, to move away from a call system where you hit one for this, hit two for this, then I think it has a very real place. So it depends on that use case, that model, what experience you're looking to promote.
Yeah,
I think the internal facing, it's going to, people are more focused on the external facing. I think the internal facing, almost like a co-pilot, like an assistant next to every individual, will be huge. It just makes people more effective at their job, arguably.
Yeah.
Actually, the phrase I heard recently was, AI won't take your job. It's the person who knows how to use AI better than you who will take your job. And that's, I think, almost like a rule of thumb. But machine learning and trend analysis just seems to get sort of more refined all the time. So I think that is going to be very valuable to board level decision making, for example.
Yes, I totally agree. It's a phrase I often use now on this podcast, but I do think it's quite apt, is that, people that see AI in the right light, in my eyes, are ones that see it as a tool rather than the solution, right? It's not a one size fits all. This is going to do this thing for you without any form of input or verification of the output. But in the same breath, it can massively 10x your output, as an individual.
But could I say, in technology, it's all the buzz about AI, but we can't lose focus on building of those core systems. AI is absolutely great. Maybe periphery, not the periphery anymore. Maybe it's a bit more embedded than that. But those core systems and those core traditional technology skills are still absolutely important.
Yeah.
I remember when I started my career, we were going to have 5th generation languages and no one was going to be programming. Didn't quite turn out like that. CAD tools were going to rule the world. Absolutely valuable, don't get me wrong. But in current technology, I think those core skill sets, and that's not, we talked about programming, but that is every aspect, right? Networking these days, right? Always has been important. But and as we stay focused on the tools that are emerging that might not be AI, but use AI. For example, let's take, we were talking about cybersecurity earlier, Microsoft Sentinel. That uses AI. You put all your logs to that. We use that. You put all your logs to Sentinel. We've got a 24-hour SOC, Security Operations Center, that runs off the back of that. And we, therefore, are very plugged into our cloud environment and what's happening. And if we think there's any, we haven't been hit with malware or breaches or everything, but we know we haven't, more to the point. And so I think that's a place where AI is a small part of a solution within an emerging technology environment that's getting, it's robust if you use all the components correctly, but it's getting very, very powerful. And people need to understand those components and what underlies those components, in my opinion. But as we talk about the CTO role is having that view. And then you encourage your team to drill in and understand what they're using instead of just using it.
Yeah. You've got to have one eye on the macro, haven't you, as the CTO, and allow others then to head into the micro for you in the right way. But no, I think that's a very valid point and a very nice balanced perspective around AI and its implementation.
And how it maps onto the business plan.
Yeah.
I actually think the business have a bigger role in the adoption of AI than technology. I mean, we need to implement it, we need to work with them, but those use cases are everything. If you take a piece of AI and look where to use it, I don't think that's as effective as saying, I have a problem, now how do I solve that? I have a new tool emerging. How can AI do this? Yeah,
absolutely. It's the old analogy, isn't it, of don't go around with a hammer looking for nails.
Yes.
Find a nail and think, how am I going to get it into the wall in the best way? So, perfect. Well, really good to talk to you around the AI piece. I'd like to kind of draw to a close by talking a bit more about your approach to hiring, because you've obviously scaled multiple offices across multiple countries, and you've spoken quite a bit about the subtleties and the value in understanding the cultural nuances within different countries. What are your thoughts on when you come to hire people into the organization? Are there particular traits and characteristics that you sort of have as a bit of a golden thread that runs throughout everybody that you hire, irrespective of role, skill, location, that sort of thing? What do you think around that? Are there particular traits that you look for in general when hiring for people into your team?
I'll say the obvious, right? There's motivation, and the ability to learn, right? So there's basic personality traits, as it were, because I'm never hiring for a job position. I'm hiring someone into a career, I want them to stay. I don't want them to work on a project and leave, and then I have someone else come and have to train them up, etc. I want to hire people with room to grow. But they have to have the technology skill sets I want. They don't have to have all of the technology skill sets I want. I'm happy to train and invest. Actually, when I was at Talent Alpha, we developed a tool that took across all the engineers that we were seeing and their CVs. We took the components of who had what skills, and again, actually, that was using AI.
Yeah.
It emerged. Certain types of skills had an adjacency with other types of skills. Okay. So if you're looking for one set of skills on your for a job role, we could match people with similar, but the learning curve from the skills they had to where you wanted them to be wasn't so great.
Interesting.
And I think with technology moving quite fast, that's the kind of thinking we need to do more of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking from a pure talent perspective of, what kind of value that would add of kind of whole other untapped realms that maybe other companies and recruiters aren't looking at, but actually there's a wholly applicable and sort of transferable skill set where the learning curve would be nowhere near as steep and require quite so much time, money and resource to get somebody up and running. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Having said that, I'm a big believer in burst resourcing. So you have a core team, and they're going to have the longevity of systems at your company. You hope, if you keep them motivated. And then burst resourcing, you can drop in the right skill sets.
Okay.
They work with the team, they train them up, then that.
Do you mean more sort of interim consulting, sort of coming in, upskilling? Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that work really, really well, particularly in a lot of kind of PE environments as well, where, they want to kind of maybe keep an existing team, but actually just make sure that they're at the right level of efficiency and even sometimes just do that due diligence piece of assessing, is the team capable of growing and getting to the place where it needs to be? And so yeah, I very much agree with that.
I'll throw one other thing in, especially after COVID, the amount of remote working tools have sort of, let's say, blossomed or proliferated, whatever word you like. So now it's, when you're looking for the right skills, you can look globally. It's more about if someone's willing to work in your time zone, and maybe a few trips to make sure you have that personal interaction enough times a year. And therefore, it's not just looking for the right skills in your town round the corner. London's a big town, but it's not just looking, for example, in where we are now, but it's looking globally. And that goes down, I think, to what I've learned through having teams around the world. The mountain doesn't have to come to Mohammed. You can actually go to where the hotspot skills are. And that's, people talk about technology broadly. Oh, yes, Warsaw, Poland is excellent. And it is. And, of course, I lived in Poland for, I say, a number of years. And therefore, my immediate gut instinct is, when I started my company where I am now, was to set up a team in Poland. I actually set one up in Bucharest in Romania, because from a hotspot skill set perspective for the systems that we're building, that's where the skills were.
Interesting.
And it's just got to stay flexible.
Yeah. Again, a very pragmatic answer, and something I would expect to hear from a seasoned CTO, that it'd be very easy, wouldn't it, if you've got probably even, sometimes an emotional connection to a company, a country, or a partner even, where you've worked with them before, and go, well, whatever work I'm going to get, I'm going to send their way because X, Y, Z, it's worked before. It again goes back to the adage of, is it the right tool for the right job? And it may be, it may not be, but being able to kind of make that distinction, I think, is a very important quality of a tech leader. Yeah,
that trust or confidence absolutely has value, but then you got to think about the bigger picture and the risks you're willing to take.
Absolutely,
as long as you're willing to fail fast.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Perfect. Well, look, I really, really enjoyed the conversation today, Mike. I think you've shared a huge amount of value. So thank you very much for coming in to talk with us. You may know by now, I like to draw to a close every episode with the same question, at risk of being repetitive, but I'm always very impressed with the answers that I get being very different. So I'd like to ask you, if I may, what would you say is your one favourite piece of advice that you've ever received throughout your career, that you would care to pass on to your fellow listeners?
I would say there's a piece of advice I've been given, and I would say there's a piece of advice that I've come to acknowledge myself. So the piece of advice I've been given is focus on the meeting or in the situation you're in, and don't think about the 101 other things that you have to do after that. Just focus on that, or you won't be efficient in that moment. And that's quite hard to do because our heads as humans can get quite noisy. So that was actually allowed me to get through my day efficiently because I was adding value in each interaction. So that was the best advice, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a fantastic piece of advice, and I know you can obviously look at that in however many lights you like, of some kind of philosophical bit about being in the moment and that kind of thing. But I couldn't agree with you more. There's so many books I've read over the years that just talk about that ability to be authentically there in the moment, just doing what you can about the situation that's in front of you right now, rather than naturally where a lot of humans' brains go to is that sort of radar, isn't it? Always looking for the next problem that's coming down the horizon, distracts you from what you're doing now. So yeah, I love that. I think that's a really nice way to draw to a close.
I'll add a closing thought though, if you don't mind.
Please do.
One thing I've learned myself, especially being in technology, is I've learned to recognize when I'm losing my audience, and we can find ourselves going down rabbit holes in technology because it's actually pretty exciting and damn interesting stuff. But the audience don't always follow you. And that's something I've probably learned to my detriment over the years, and have tried to tune as I as I move forward.
So what are your thoughts on that as the solution? Is it to meet people where they're at in terms of how you approach the conversation and the vernacular and vocabulary that you use?
Yes. And when I notice they're tuning out, to stop,
right,
and I'll just ask them what they want to know.
Yeah, fair enough. Self-awareness, that's another great quality of a CTO. Absolutely. But look, Mike, thanks again. Really enjoyed the chat, and I wish you all the very best with K2 moving forward. You're doing fantastic work, and very, very meaningful and very fulfilling, I'm sure. And please do come back in, have another chat with us at some point in the future. We'd love to chat again.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you.